psychedelics not only offer a novel biological means through which to treat some of the most treatment-resistant mental health conditions, for many, they also offer a connection to spirit. And so this is the only psychiatric medication out there technically that offers a connection to spirit. So it's very exciting in my field where I'm trying to merge mental health and spirituality.
Welcome to the Consciousness of the Way. I'm your humble servant and Sifu, Taoist Master San Qing, and I have an incredible guest here today. I know you guys have heard it all before. I come down to the tree. It's Christmas morning, and the universe has brought me an incredible being, and this particular guest is no exception. I'm very grateful to have to the podcast today Anna Yusim, an MD, a psychiatrist, and a master of many things, working in all different types of spaces, helping the conscious collective. Welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Thank you so much, San. It's such a pleasure to be here with you today.
Well, the pleasure is all mine, and so is it the audience's, to have you basically sharing this incredible mastery and insight that is not, in my personal opinion, the typical lens that someone that has a deep understanding of a specific type of perception, an understanding of what reality really is. You have a broad lens that you speak on things that would be more in a category that is not in the same category that you have mastered in many different ways. I would love to share with the audience a little bit about you leading up to this very moment.
Sure. So I have had a very full and rich life for which I am incredibly grateful. I was born in Moscow, Russia, came to Chicago with my family when I was 5 years old. My dad, biomedical engineer and physics professor. My mom, a computer programmer and deeply spiritual person. So I came from very rational and, on my mom's side, very spiritual. But I always was much more like my dad growing up. So I developed my mind, I developed my brain. I went to the Illinois Math and Science Academy. I was going to be a mathematician. I come from a long line of mathematicians. So I was on the math team and would do math contest problems. I was a total nerd and loved it way back in the day. And then went to Stanford, where all of the math classes were taught by TAs who barely spoke English. So then my passion for math starts to dwindle. I discover these books of Dr. Irvin Yalom, this brilliant, amazing existential psychiatrist who wrote so beautifully and masterfully about the depth of his patients' inner experiences. And I realized that is who I want to be. I want to be a psychiatrist who goes as deep with my patients and writes their stories. And that's ultimately what my life ended up being, except Dr. Yalom was an atheist, and spirituality entered my life towards the end of my medical training. And so that became a really important catalyst for so many things in my life, including the book that I wrote called Fulfilled, about the intersection of mental health and spirituality, and the center I'm currently starting where I'm on faculty at Yale, the Yale Mental Health and Spirituality Center.
Wow. What an amazing journey that you've gone through in your lifetime. And you don't look a day over 14. My goodness, it's incredible. And that really is contributed to by your state of being, because that's a representation of the physical body from a Taoist perspective, is how much you're sort of handling your business on the internal aspect. And it's so powerful. So I'm just in awe. I'm very grateful. So let's speak a little bit more about mental health, spirituality. This is an interesting category that people are sort of like crossing into, blending, blurring. Where do you think we're going today in this very topic? Because the people are kind of getting what I like to call a glimpse within the space that I teach people in, where they get a sample of their ability to perceive things at a whole nother level. And I call this sensory perception. And then they lose it and they go chasing what I call the spiritual dragon, looking to acquire this ability again, and they can't find it. What are your thoughts on where things are going today? Because you have a very clear path and you're really developing an incredible community where people can find answers to these very questions.
Yes, yes. And so I answer the first question as to where is the state of our mental health going. It's such an important question because right now we have a mental health pandemic, a mental health epidemic, whatever you want to call it. But mental health in many ways is at an all-time low, especially for adolescents and children. There is more suicidal thoughts among adolescents, more anxiety, more depression, more domestic violence, more alcoholism. Every marker of mental health is unfortunately one of the highest levels that it's ever been in the state of the world. And this has been since the pandemic and thereafter. And it's, we're trying to do things to make it better, but it's very multifaceted. And I think at the root, it's really our reshaping our conception of what is happiness, what is productivity, what is well-being in our society, and how do we help our society to up-level our consciousness? How do we remove the barriers to that? For young children and adolescents, it was found that social media was unfortunately one of the main precursors, and the Surgeon General of Vivek Murthy released numerous statements and research showing how the rise of children spending more time on social media corresponded very, very seriously and in a direct fashion with increased anxiety, depression, insomnia among children and adolescents. And so after a certain number of hours on social media, it's pretty much, not a good thing, maybe a little bit. And this is the thing. I think that the answer to the question of what do we do from here is we ask questions of how do we promote unity together? How do we use digital media, technology, telehealth, all of that in order to bring us together as opposed to actually separating us and leading people to compare and despair mentalities, self-comparisons, and all sorts of other things that social media and other things like this can do. So we're about, I think, raising unity consciousness. And that is one of the ways in which we're going to solve the mental health crisis. There's many, many other ways, including also obviously helping the underserved and underprivileged, most importantly, the people who are also more affected disproportionately than others, and figuring out ways to reach those communities as well and enable them to have access, equity, and inclusion.
Right. I mean, it is. It's sort of a foundational thing. So if you're looking at a larger sort of lens and you're applying this to a community, someone with your insight and mastery and experience, how do you implement a large scope sort of like answer to this very problem? I know you're developing things in both ends of America right now, having incredible roots in Yale and Stanford, which is really profound because you are evidence of the insight that goes beyond the very limited lens of academia, because a lot of people tend to get caught up in that. They get a bunch of letters behind their name and they stay there. They're in this little lens and they don't expand themselves. You have an insight that I've never seen before from someone with the amount of development and education that you've had. So I'm really blown away by that because it's needed. Where do you take someone who is lost, who's clearly subject to it? They're having these thoughts of self-harm, of deficiency, depression, oppression. Well, it kind of goes in this order for someone that I'm aware of. It's oppression, depression, and then you get the P word, and that could be questionable. But that's sort of like the run of the mill, sort of like over controlling sort of state that they can't get out of. So what would you do for a large sort of, would you set up a meditation clinic or something where someone could start with something basic to get some sort of insight into their mind?
Yeah, and this is something that I'm working with other companies on, is creating a mental health and spirituality infrastructure. Like, what does that look like, right? And as you said, this is something that is so multifaceted. It has to be very large scale, encompassing every aspect of home, family, society. Because first it begins in the home, and it's giving families good foundations. And at the end of the day, if people don't have the money for food, water, shelter, and a safe place to live, their mental health is going to suffer. And these are very, very key basic factors. So, when you can't be thinking about mental health unless you also think about having, safety and some form of equity in, just people's basic needs. That's number one. And then at every level, like being able to, when a person does have an issue, when a child has an issue, when an adult has an issue, being able to have someone meet that person where they're at and really help them to understand what's going on and what are the options from a mind, body, spirit perspective. How do you think about this? How do you shift your mindset? How do you discipline the mind? How do you make positive, constructive decisions? If you are spiraling in your thoughts with this control, like you said, obsessive thinking, depression, what are some ways to get out of it? At what point do you have to think about medication as a biological way of interceding in a problem? In what way, in what situations is therapy enough? In what situations talking to a friend enough? How do we equip our friends to know when you have a problem, what to say, how to say the right thing to help you so that you don't spiral, so that you're actually able to pull yourself out and be resilient and self-sufficient in being able to manage your own mental health.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's kind of fundamentally the starting point for any Taoist practitioner on the journey to realize a deeper understanding. We always start with a really simple thing: your emotions don't control you; you control your emotions. And then people are like, "Whoa, is that really an option?" Yeah, absolutely, 100% an option. And then how do we get there? Not
Yeah.
everyone can sit down with you and you can give them a very, very unique roadmap to their awakening and their mental health. So on a bigger scale, this sort of presents the rolling out of the projects that you're involved with right now to create the environment where people can get the type of help that they need. So what would you start what would from your professional opinion, starting out with someone that's sort of plagued with or you have diagnosed them with something like depression, what would be a an exit from this state of you know processes?
Yeah, exactly. And you use the two terms sort of mental health and enlightenment together. And certainly an enlightenment path is one of the ways of liberating yourself from mental health challenges. And yet along the way, oftentimes, just as part of anybody's enlightenment, you can have those challenges. And for some people, they can overshoot the mark a little bit and have depressive symptoms or even psychotic symptoms in their way to spiritual ascension. And, the deeper question that you asked, what do you do? How do you help people out of these depressive states? Is first, you help them to recognize them and to give language to what they're feeling, to find meaning in their experience, to understand it at the deepest, most personal, subjective level as to what it means to them. And then to really, really feel their feelings, to not have to push it away, to feel them fully and completely, to learn to do that without because what we resist persists. And oftentimes we will avoid things and sweep things under the rug. And only later it'll come back in all these untowered ways to affect us and our relationships in ways that we don't want. And so, and at the end of the day, once you do that, what you're essentially doing is helping people metabolize their feelings and metabolize what it is that they are experiencing. And from that place, they can make a healthy, constructive choice. This is how I'm feeling. What do I want to do in order to feel better? What are 3 things I can do? When I hit rock bottom, what's my go-to? Who do I call? What practices? What habits do I do? Lifestyle is medicine. Good habits are medicine. Good food is medicine. Mystical and experiences are medicine. Enlightenment experiences are medicine. What medicine works for you? What medicine do you need to elevate your consciousness?
I think and you brought up an interesting tool, telehealth or tele.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so, I actually, I don't know whether you noticed this. I created an app that does exactly the very things we're speaking of. So it's kind of like people go, "Hang on a second, I'm John Smith, the guy that cleans the toilets at McDonald's, and I am, Lama Jeffrey, who has an
Mhm, mhm.
who spent 30 years, you know, acquiring this relationship with Buddha." And what happens is everything has this understanding that everything is a thought, feeling, and an emotion. And once you encapsulate
Yeah.
that, and realize that that's the basic present moment right now, I was like, okay, well, how do I help people at a bigger level where people can acquire this state and train in it and actually develop a skill that can be measured? Because this is where we get down to the neuroplasticity. This is where we're like, okay, well, what does that mean? You spoke on the whole metabolize the state that you're in, metabolize that emotion, metabolize that thought. Because really, if you're able to remove the feeling and the emotion, it becomes wisdom. It becomes something that you
Yes.
can recall and validate as something that has helped you expand the lens that you're in. So I developed this app, and it's basically a 2-year journey if someone goes on it, to enlightenment, activating 81 energy centers between themselves and the universe. But in the first, literally, anyone who's a John Smith that's got issues will master their emotions in the first 9 weeks. And people are like, that sounds like a tall glass of water for that. Well, you get to measure it within the first 27 minutes that you experience it. So it's a visual audible experience, creating a kinesthetic response that will be measured by you, and you can call on it immediately. There's an exercise that I give people after they do it, because I think a lot of people go down this spiritual path we speak on, or they get involved with experts like yourself, and they're like, okay, well, how do I measure it for myself outside of an environment where I'm having someone else support me to help me define what it is I'm experiencing? Well, that's the very essence of understanding the soft technology, is that you can measure it for yourself. And so people will hit play, and the normal response is instantly, I feel like I've had 5 pina coladas, a full body massage, in 3 days in the Bahamas. And it's like, I don't get it. Like, I've got accountants that are like, I was going into this tax season thinking I'm going to literally have to admit myself for an evaluation, and I've been more calm now than I ever have in my whole life. I can't believe it. And these are the type of like
Yeah.
effects.
Yeah, it's a huge thing. I feel like this digital technology and the capacity for it is astounding, especially also there's so many issues with access, equity, and inclusion, right? And there's people that don't have access to people like you and I. There's even a lot of people who don't have, unfortunately, fast broadband internet. And, there's programs right now with the Biden administration seeking to remedy that, and many other programs, but that's really the reality. But eventually, if we can get that digital technology, telehealth as ways of connecting each other and giving people tools, whether those tools be like you and I looking at each other like this, or people using apps in a more self-guided fashion to be able to calm their nerves and be able to start to have feedback systems for themselves that help elevate their own consciousness. What a beautiful thing. We have to use technology for that, especially with AI.
Right. AI is an interesting one. I feel like
Mhm.
there's sort of like this underlying separation that comes with the word consciousness, as opposed to a full embodied realization.
Mhm.
People use it, and it's sort of, I'm not pointing my finger at you, but there are people in certain communities that will say, well, you're only conscious when you're awake. And
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Just this idea of the separation of mind, body, and spirit, or mind, body, and soul, right? Or mind and body, even the separation. And so that separation moved towards this idea of embodied cognition, that we are neither a mind or a body, but every mind is a body and every body is a mind. And mind and body is one. And you can't have a healthy mind without a healthy body, and vice versa. And this is actually one of my, platforms. And what I care so deeply about is right now, in my field, mental health psychiatry, it's so mind and brain focused with 2 primary modalities: psychotherapy for the mind and psychopharmacology for the brain. And what often psychiatry is missing is focus on the body and the spirit. So this is what I'm trying to bring in: the spirit through this mental health and spirituality center, through being able to speak with amazing people like yourself, Son, and bringing spirituality into the discourse, and the body by bringing into psychiatry those parts of our somatic and bodily experiences that are key to mental health, but often overlooked, such as nutritional psychiatry. The food is medicine movement, right? Exercise psychology, healthy sexuality and pleasure, longevity and fertility, our connection to nature. All of these things, such key, crucial aspects of our mental health that are related to our body. And so all of that mind, body, and spirit needs to be fully engaged for mental and physical health and well-being.
How are you what's your response? Because it's so that is cutting edge, in my opinion, for where people are today in their own awareness, coming from independent sort of like categories, like someone who might be just neurology or biology or physiology or psychology. How are you being greeted, or how are people,
Yeah,
ears starting to understand this, or they're like, hey, whoa, 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 you're crossing the lines here now, and it's getting a little muddy, because I mean, measurement,
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're exactly right. We're very siloed and we are masters of specialization, and we're rewarded in many ways to specialize and go even deeper. But often the most brilliant discoveries in all disciplines are made at the intersection of the disciplines. So I think it's time to, put down the fences of our silos and actually start to interconnect and think in that way. And that's what I'm certainly trying to do. And, I think it's also, especially if you want to create a paradigm shift, you don't want to go and be super, super aggressive. I think it's understanding and being within the current paradigm and helping to expand the boundaries of that paradigm as society is ready, as the culture is ready, as the paradigm is ready to shift. So I think the timing and the zeitgeist of it is also just being at the right time at the right place, because so many people have the right message at the wrong time and it just can't be heard. So I think it's also about being in flow and being soft and gentle with your message, and then hopefully bringing it at the right time that people are able to receive.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, human timeline tells us, things repeat themselves. So,
Always.
400 years ago, 500 years ago, science and mysticism were as one. They were blended
Mhm,
together, and that was
exactly.
part of the equation. It wasn't a separated sort of like Newtonian sort of like limited reality, really, quite frankly. You're
Exactly.
breaking apart the understanding and sort of sitting more in the materialist viewpoint, which separates you from you. And so what you're speaking of is really groundbreaking for especially someone that is on the edge of, you know changing people's perception, because still to this day I can come across people that are set in their ways of a Newtonian sort of framework, where we've been offered this idea of the quantum model for about 100 years, and it sort of makes sense with a spiritual journey that that would be more self-evident by just meditating, or getting thinking about your mother and she calls you, or finding the parking fairy, and all of a sudden these synchronicities, they have to be more than just a coincidence, which I don't believe there are. That everything is a constant synchronicity within this sort of state of mind, as above, as below, from a hermetic sort of perception, and then it sort of ripples over into that. So when you went down your spiritual path, do you have a specific sort of like guiding force that you go back to, or you cultivate, that might be something you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, I feel as though synchronicity and the movement of time and space in my life is really my guide. And I've had many different spiritual practices from which I've learned over time. For about 12 years, I studied Kabbalah. That was my first spiritual practice. And that was fascinating. I learned so much. It really just changed my perception of the world. And I'll tell you one of the ways in which it did that. In science, you study that. What you see with your eyes and hear with your ears is reality. It's not just reality, it's 100% of reality. Everything that is real and known can be subjected to experimentation and empiricism and insight and vision, right? And then in Kabbalah, one of the first principles is actually 99% of the world is unseen and unheard. Only 1% of reality can be seen and heard. And so it's like this radical shift. And I thought, what an interesting theory. And so it's these kinds of ideas. And then from there, I've worked with a number of different teachers and read many different books and really just been in my own process. So I am always just taken where the universe takes me. And it's about having deeper levels of surrender and being really in flow with life and being open to what is presented in terms of the challenges as well as the openings. And so my path has also included I've done Joe Dispenza retreats for a while. Those have been wonderful, very expansive. I've done some very interesting psychedelic retreats. That's been incredibly expansive because psychedelics not only offer a novel biological means through which to treat some of the most treatment resistant mental health conditions. For many, they also offer a connection to spirit. And so this is the only psychiatric medication out there technically that offers a connection to spirit. So it's very exciting in my field where I'm trying to merge mental health and spirituality. So I've been very interested in that world. And so many other worlds, a lot of practices of connecting to nature, connecting to Mother Earth, learning from indigenous wisdom, indigenous tribes. So, and what are my practices presently? I'm working actually with some of the work of Marissa Peer, and I'm doing some of her conscious reprogramming exercises. That's been really fascinating. I want to learn from the other masters, other people who have come before me who are doing amazing work and have powerful tools for upliftment.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, validation, I always remind people, and it might sound a little out there, but not for you, but for someone else that might have a limited viewpoint, your truth is the only truth you need to be concerned with. And most people get a little raised up by that. And they're like, hang on a second, but what if I'm delusional and I've decided that's my truth? Well, it sort of like comes down to that, fundamental, if you're thinking, you're not knowing; if you're knowing, you're feeling. And so that feeling, once synchronized with an energetic framework of understanding, you build the internal alchemy, which is a ancient Taoist practice. And in my opinion, I'm a little biased, second to none. I mean, you cannot even hold a candle. There isn't a practice across the globe that could come close to the internal alchemy. And so when you get into that, you have a very clear observer sort of position where you're able to observe things and move things like icons on a computer screen. So you're discerning and affirming with a very clear stance, because there's a vibratory visceral experience that will be measured. And once you obtain that, the vibration comes from the energy, and then that vibration has a frequency, and that frequency is the resonance that, if you can hold it, you will obtain certain very, very self-evident experiences where, hang on a second, I just hit this resonance and it was palpable, the energetics from all the different layers of understanding from a much more sort of like refined subtlety. You can determine what that is. And so I really always recommend someone to define their practice with sort of an energetic, a deeper understanding, because then it's not something that's sort of here that can't be qualified or quantified within this 3D reality. And so it's evidence-based by, hang on a second, I cultivated this space, and we might go out to the idea of manifestation, magic, healing. And now magic in of itself is just a highly detailed manifestation, which someone could attribute to a visualization, imagery, and then this ability to sort of access the conscious mind, enveloping the brain so that you're accessing theta, alpha, delta all at once, which I imagine you're referencing to this conscious reprogramming. And that would come in a brainwave state that I've been able to measure over the years is a gamma brainwave. So 40 hertz and above. And that's amazing. Kind of like, that's what happens
Super
with the
app. Yeah.
Right. And that's the app that I developed. And that's the thing that blows people's minds, because they will hit the 40 and they're like, hang on a second, I'm super high. I feel so embodied. My body is just vibrating, and I'm just as calm and cool and chill and aware. And so, of course, you manipulate your state. So alpha, theta, delta, you're now playing with all the stuff that people go, hang on a second, you developed that when you were 7, and now we got a problem. Here we go. Now we have to get over what we call, from a hypnotist or a psychologist perspective, a psychiatrist perspective, the critical faculty, the firewall of your mind. Now, how do we jump over that? And so you're using practices that clearly fundamentally changed. Were you using those before, or this is just a different viewpoint from your own mastery?
I mean, my whole thing is I want to learn as many practices as I can because I feel like that's what I'm supposed to give to the world. And so I'm always looking to learn new practices. There are certain people who have one practice throughout a lifetime. I know I'm not going to be that person. I know I'm going to have 6 months, a year, 6 months, a year. I'm going to have practices like that and then on to the next thing. That's just how I'm wired. And I know that that's part of my purpose. Yeah. So I'm always looking for new and more expansive practices. And I call in the practices that I need based on what is coming up in my life and what I want to give to the world and what my clients and patients need at that time.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of like the cross sectioning of people paralleling, Taoism to Gnosticism to Rosicrucian and belief systems, Kabbalah. I mean, we sort of intersect and start balancing these things out and go, hang on a second, well, this practice has this and this has this, and wow, this worked here, and maybe I could move this over. And I feel like there's a new sort of gnosis that's going on where people are like, hang on, I could take a splash of this and a pinch of this and put it together, and it's repeatable. The driving force for me is it needs to be repeatable. There needs to be a level of awareness. Normally, getting into that state of altering things like PTSD and things of that nature, you show someone how to do that and they do it themselves and they're like, I spent 40 years being afraid of heights and now I'm standing at the top of the stratosphere because I'm down here in Nevada. So you're standing at the top of the stratosphere, I'm going to jump off and I'm feeling super high. How, this is sort of like this instant sort of state. Have you noticed that this is sort of like something that is becoming more apparent to you over your journey helping people, that they're accessing? We're talking about 2024 from a spiritual numerology, astrology perspective. People are making very broad claims that this is the year of consciousness, awareness, a different state. And quite frankly, I have a friend of the channel who reads the Schumann resonance, and I tend to measure a lot of things because it's parallel to the Schumann resonance of the Earth is 7.8 hertz generally, which would then reference to you are, all is one, one is all. So the Earth frequency is 7.8, and then you have this state that you're in, which normally most people pop out of bed at the beta. They got a high beta and just burn out their adrenals and everything else before the end of the day, and then they hope to get home and relax and find some sort of like end to the misery of their reality. It happens. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's so true. I think that this is definitely the time when it's, the decade of consciousness, it's the century of consciousness, it's the year of consciousness, and people are seeking to manifest and to create and to break through their existing barriers, the boundaries of their mind, the boundaries of their thought. And that, I think the way that you described it is getting all the brainwaves to work together and get into gamma, which is super consciousness, is a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I'd love to learn more about your app that facilitates that for people. It sounds fascinating. And yeah, I think people are just looking for that. And they're looking for faster, more powerful, more innovative ways to be able to accelerate their own progress with respect to consciousness. So we have, Moore's law, and we have Moore's law, which talks about the rate of technological development, and that essentially you had every 2 years that you had exponential growth of because of the number, basically the computing power was getting higher and cheaper, and everything was getting much, much smaller to be able to do. But human consciousness isn't keeping up with Moore's law. And so there's a way in which we need essentially a Moore's law of human consciousness. And now with AI, it's like, with AI, the growth even of Moore's law, it's like 10 times that. It's accelerated because we have the capacity of the AI to teach itself. And there's going to be a level, I was like hearing Elon Musk talk about it yesterday, at which computer consciousness is going to overtake human consciousness. And he thinks it's going to be about 2030. right? Or 2029, like not too far away. And what does that mean? What does that look like? And how do we as humans keep up with that? And what do we do? What safeguards do we put in place to ensure that we're able to still keep, the parts of the human experience that are sacred and valuable? And it's really interesting. Like, what can you not teach AI? Can you teach AI clairvoyance, claircognizance, clairsentience, audience, like ways of receiving intuitive information? Is that possible? There's certain things we didn't think that we can teach AI, like creativity. And now actually AI could be really, really creative. Empathy. AI, we know, could be very empathic. So who knows? Those things that we think are our unique human capacities, we have machines that one day will already are doing it beside us and one day will, surpass us. So what does that say about the nature of consciousness? Those are big questions.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you bring us to a point of sort of transhumanism. It's like, where is this going? Still to this day, I mean, they want to, cross the boundaries into the idea that you're going to use AI to direct this vehicle. But the truth is, there's still a scientific community that can't explain the first beat of a baby's heart.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
What, are they going to prepare to acknowledge that the soul enters the body
Yeah.
to
Mm-hmm.
create sort of like realization that the heart is, they can't explain it. Like from a scientific perspective, they cannot explain how that takes place, which is sort of brings me to the resonance of the sort of waves of energy, right? Because everything is energy, frequency, vibration. And ultimately, something material is still energy, frequency, and vibration. And so, how that light is being altered from your perception, as you referred to not so long ago, about the real visual effect of maybe you're only looking at 1% of what's really going on from a Kabbalah perspective, that to me seems to be more self-evident and valid within a lot of indigenous practices, that they've come to this realization. I've had many students, most of them sort of either doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists, therapists, Chinese medicine doctors, chiropractors, functional medicine doctors. They always come back to the energy for the fundamental reason. It's like, you can't make this stuff up. The synchronicity, once you get the internal alchemy stuff going, and I always refer back to that, because when you turn this stuff on, it's like a Grand Central Station of plutonium magnet to realize many things. And so most people have an idea conceptually, and they might refer to it as a Kundalini awakening. Quite frankly, it's conceptual for most. You get an energetic bump, and really the alchemy comes from a much deeper understanding. I've only ever come across two people through my life experiences that are truly Kundalini awakened, and they're gurus that have got, the ability to do things that I'm more familiar with, stopping the heart, doing things that are on a different level from accessing the autonomous behavior that you think is not accessible. And then things like levitation, which I've never really gravitated to, but I've seen it with my own eyes, and it's wild that someone can
It happens. Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
it's fascinating where we're going, and you're integrating so many interesting things that I really feel like you're a voice that is listening to this other mystical side from your spiritual journeys, to be able to integrate this stuff so people can really get a broader scope of what's going on. Because there's a huge community that, if I had a neuroscientist on here right now, they would tell me, you cannot feel your third eye. And I'm like, hang on a second. I don't need it to be sympathetically innervated for me to feel it. Once I master the 50 trillion cells of my physical flesh, I can feel anything, right down to a subatomic particle. So, there's and it's a healthy debate. I'm not dismissing what they believe, but I can show you, and I'm a show me guy. I'm clearly I'm going to show my colors. I'm I'm an 80s guy, so I'll do the Pepsi challenge with anyone when it comes to the energetics. And it's about showing people. It's about like, okay, this is your validation. You do something completely
Totally.
out of the scope of what they consider reality, and they go,
Mhm.
hang on a second, whoa, okay, I came to you completely anxious and fearful and depressed, and inside of a few seconds, I felt more grounded and whole and completely aware of who I am just through energetic practices that are accessible to anyone if you know how to do it. And so you give people a bump, and you give them what they would call some type of like awakening, maybe a healing, perhaps how they want to see it, mental, emotional, physical, spiritual. They're getting this shift of synchronicity within the energetic body. How much of that energetic, because you referenced Joe Dispenza and you referenced Kabbalah, do you lean on any of the energetic stuff a little bit more in your own journey, or you're still searching?
I do, I have a lot of friends who are energy healers, who are medical intuitives, etc. And then I am always developing that capacity within myself. I also have energy work that I do with my clients, always heart opening work, and a lot of intuitive capacities. And so this is something that is a constant source of growth and excitement and expansion for me, to learn how to develop my own capacities and help other people develop theirs, and then use those capacities for the benefit of humanity to help others. So I have, yeah.
I think it's really fascinating because you're integrating in the clair senses, right? That's one of the things I teach people is the clair spectrum.
Declares,
Most
exactly.
most people sort of go, oh, there's five senses, and maybe you get a sixth one. I go, if you can speak something in your mind, hear it in your mind, say it in your mind, there's three more. There you go. You've got eight. Okay, let's keep going.
Yeah,
And it's sort
exactly.
of like limited. Personally, it's limited by your perception, limited by your imagination. And then what's going to be the kicker is being able to validate it. So you mentioned clairvoyance, which is not sort of usual for a psychiatrist to mention clairvoyance. I think it's really mind blowing. I love it. I just love it. But
Mm.
how is that received by your community when you start talking in these type of terms?
Yeah, and I think the important thing with this is to subject all of these questions and terms and ideas to rigorous scientific study. And that's exactly what we're trying to do at Yale. And actually, one of the first projects of the Yale Mental Health and Spirituality Center, once it gets funded, will be to study the nature of intuitive processes. And we have this amazing researcher, Dr. Al Powers. So he has studied schizophrenics, right? The sensory processing of schizophrenics. And these are individuals who hear voices, but often they don't have control of the voices. And the voices can tell them to do bad things and lead to downward spirals in their life, right? So it's very like the voices can be dangerous in that situation. And as his control group, he's had individuals who hear voices, but actually use those voices for the benefit of humanity, like psychics and mediums, and actually have much more control over those voices. So, what we're proposing with Dr. Powers, and he's excited about this, is we're going to have as the experimental group the psychics and mediums to understand the nature of their clairaudience, their voice hearing, and then maybe also look at processes like clairvoyance, clairsentience, claircognizance, other ways of knowing, the other clairs, right? And then to study that as the main group to understand what brain regions are involved and really just go deeper overall.
That's awesome. I mean, I measure brain waves. I've got a little setup, 19 channels, and when I channel, like I've been doing this maybe too long, over 30 years. So I've been teaching people this stuff. I channeled for the first time 30 years ago, and I channeled my teacher Lutsu today. And when I channel him, I'm going up 100 to 400 to probably, if I had the equipment, measure it to a level that goes way beyond this electromagnetic spectrum. And so, the chi, the life force, the energy is on it's a different deal. It's not even of this world. So, you have this sort of state, and if you're doing mediumship stuff, I find the activity goes down. And so it's really weird. And, a friend of the channel, who's a neuroscientist. He measures psychics and mediums, and he has a similar result from when he measures the brainwaves. And then you can get some, erratic stuff where, hey, you're getting direct source information, you're handing it to this person, yet there's no brain activity, or there's a ton of brain activity. And so it's just fascinating. And the idea that you're actually going on that journey right now excites me so much, because it's needed. It's so needed to get a deeper understanding. And 30 years ago, when someone would come to me with the diagnosis of a psychotic episode, and they know that they're really plagued with something that they believe is something greater, this is part of the lineage of the practices that I do as a Taoist priest. One a 66 generation holder, the other one 126 generation holder, and these are ancient rituals. And we could go to that page of complete delusion, but exorcisms are sort of another whole different category that we don't need to talk about today. But it's a state of, I always tell people, you're a tuning fork, and you are attuning yourself. There's an infinite amount of spirits, entities that are occupying this space. The space that you think is empty is full. And so if you attune to it, and I've had students over the years that had this fascination, obsession with being the badass exorcist. And I'm like, listen, you are creating this. So what does that mean? It means that you are basically sitting there at your little altar of reality, and you are commanding these energies to find you, and they're being created in your reality. And the probability of that will be determined by your experience, but they're kind of sobering in many forms. And then I won't see them for years. And so now that same person 30 years ago that would be, hey, I think I'm having a psychotic episode, is like, I'm channeling the Palladians. And so you're like, oh, this is fascinating how things have changed over decades. And now you have this sort of like, you look up Yelp, and there's 500 healers, 500 light workers, 500 psychics and mediums, and then this cross-sectioning of someone so in depth and mastered at what you do. And then you're acknowledging another incredible aspect of you, being a facet of your mastery, is getting into the spiritual and these layered sensory perception. I kind of put it under one blanket. A lot of people look at me like, oh, you're a Taoist priest. Well, the stuff I train people in is all the paranormal, metaphysical, parapsychologist sort of stuff that people are like, oh, I had no idea. Well, I just call myself a priest. I find it easier that way. But these layers, and you're getting into this stuff. Personally, I love watching people heal themselves. I love watching you synchronize the energetic field, and then they have this epiphany, whether it's mental, emotional, physical, spiritual. And I've seen some physical stuff that would blow your mind. And once people align themselves, I'm sure, having been involved in you, to your own admission, Joe Dispenza, you probably went on a weekend or two where you're like, holy moly, I've just gone into a group of people, and you got people popping off left, right, and center with all these weird things. Did you witness anything like that when you're on these?
Oh, yes, absolutely. People have these amazing experiences, and I think it's the group and the field that creates it, and all the energy, because people do have, he uses a lot of Kundalini energy in his meditations, and a lot of people have never had experiences in groups like that are so potent, and where they are so energetically open, and where they're doing so much meditation in such a short period of time.
Yeah, it's like a group thing. The most I've ever had at one group healing event was about 1,000 people. You link them up, and it's like a plutonium dump site of energy. It's second to none, but it's like tuning into what we speak of, which is like beyond the electromagnetic field within this 3D reality. So now we're getting into, what we call maybe from a scientific perspective, the 4D, the 5D, and now we're creating what a quantum physicist would call, they've attributed to a scalar wave. I just call it chi. I call it Tao energy, the mother of all things. People will call it God, universe, Buddha. I mean, but it's fundamentally different. The palpability of it, the actual experience that you get, and what happens when you ascend is a much denser realization. It's like really interesting how it changes, because I tell people, a lot of people, if you've ever experienced, have you ever bent a spoon before?
No.
So that state is like, first you want it to be tactile. So the infant level is grab something, a spoon, a piece of metal, and you feel that the firmness against your physical flesh. Then you put your intention through an activation into the center point, and you will watch the fundamental shift of it from a subatomic level, and it will melt like butter. And then you sort of take it to the next level where you got a spoon and you melt it like a candle. And then finally, the graduate level is taking a fork and bending the prongs in either direction using your intention. Now, does it generate a lot of energy? It can do. I think the biggest problem with people, and I'm saying it's problematic because so many healers and therapists, they get into assuming that it's their energy. And so you get exhausted, like the massage therapist, the therapist. I mean, even people from incredible positions like yourself, if you have 10 clients in a day and they're problematic, and you're not able to realize that this doesn't have to be your energy, it will exhaust you no matter how mastered you are. And so realizing that it's not your energy, that you have to surrender to the uplifting effect of that individual. Have you noticed this at all yourself?
Yeah, yeah. I think that oftentimes we try to do so much in the world through our own energy and will. And what we don't realize is that there's actually source that can help us in every step of the way if we know how to access it and if we know how to surrender and open ourselves up to that. So I think that this is a perfect example of that. And not just for bending spoons but actually for healing others, for creating things in our life, for manifesting that which we desire, for helping people. If we are able to co-create together with source, as opposed to feeling like we're doing it on our own, it becomes a little bit easier.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I use the spoon thing as an example because it's like it's a certain state. You get into a certain state, you feel it. It's second to none, and that's also relevant, excuse me, to physical flesh. So that's the same ballpark. I am so grateful that you spent your time with us today. One quick, what's your definition of consciousness? Go.
I believe consciousness is our expansiveness and awareness of ourselves and the world in this universe. And it encompasses many different faculties, including the capacity for reason, empathy, love, intuition. All of these mental, physical, emotional processes are all encompassed within consciousness.
That's amazing. I never hear the same answer from any of the guests. I think it's incredible. I want to thank you today for coming in and sharing your time with us on the podcast. I'm going to put all your social media and where people can find you under this podcast. What is the easiest way for someone to access? Are you available or are you booked up? If someone sees this and they want to come and see you, is there a virtual, or if they're in the area, how would
Yeah.
how would they proceed?
Yes, they can contact me at www.annayusim.com on my website, and we can go from there.
Wow. Again, thank you so much for spending your time with us today on the podcast. It's been a real pleasure. And I look forward to a continued conversation at some point at your.
Wonderful. Me too, San. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this, and I look forward to speaking again soon.
I'm looking forward to. I want to thank you. I want to thank the universe for bringing you into my life. I want to thank the audience for sharing their time with us today. I am your humble servant and Sifu Taoist Master San Qing, and I will see you on the next one, guys.